Greetings to all listeners. This is King H, radical Pan-African activist from Ambazonia, aka Ambas Bay. News is out. Other French African nations are following the steps of Mali and Central African Republic. Burkina Faso has decided to kick out the military of France out of Burkina Faso. And let me tell you this, Africans. There's an idea that Africans or African nations cannot survive without Western nations, without G7, without Britain, without US, without European nations, that we need them in order for Africa to grow. But if you look at the past 100 years, 200 years, even 300 years, has Africa really grown with working with Western nations? No. As a matter of fact, Africa has been held backwards. The growth of Africa has been held backward. So it's time for African nations to see that they can do things on their own. And they could choose the leaders, and they could choose the other nations that they want to work with, just like G7 nations choose the better partners that they want. Their most significant partners are not African nations. Their most significant partners are Japan, are United Kingdom, US, working as a singular force under the G7, under the World Economic Forum. The World Economic Forum is actually a Western economic forum. It's not for the world. It's for where the Western nations can determine the fate of the world by deciding on it. So it is time for African nations, especially Sahel nations, or especially French African nations, to realize that they don't need France in Africa, but France need Africa to grow. If Africa wants to grow, if nations in the Sahel area wants to grow, they have to understand that they don't need France. France has been there for so many years. And nations like Mali, nations like Niger, Central African Republic, Cameroon, Burkina Faso, Senegal, has not prospered, has not grown. So it's time for French Africa. It's time for the Sahel nations to kick France out of Africa. And it started with Mali. Central Africa did it. Now Burkina Faso has decided to kick the military of France out of Africa. We need all Sahel nations to do the same. We need Niger to do the same. We need Cameroon, which is part of the Sahel region or area, to do the same. We need Senegal to kick out France and the military of France. There's a tactics that the G7, that Western nations use against other nations and especially against Africa, is the divide and conquer strategy. It's time for Sahel to kick France out and work with each other. Mali needs to work with Burkina Faso. Burkina Faso needs to work with Mali. Niger needs to work with Burkina Faso. Niger needs to work with Mali. Central Africa needs to work with Niger. We African nations in the Sahel area need to work with one another and stop listening to France, who keep meddling in the growth of Sahel area and in the growth of Africa in general. We do not need France in Africa. We have to kick out the colonial masters out of Africa. It is our birthright, it's our duty as Africans to do that. And we must do that. Africa must grow and move away from the colonial era and the colonial masters and also neo-colonization. Africa can never grow with a strong influence of the colonial masters like France and Britain, Germany. And if you notice, like in Mali, like in Central African Republic, when you kick out France, what happened? There's an effect that happens. It's not only France that leaves. When France leaves, Germany leaves. When France leaves, Germany leaves. When Germany leaves, other European nations that are in Africa exploiting and using Africa for their own benefit, for their own growth, they also leave. You see, when you have Western nations roaming around the continent of Africa, they're not there to make Africa grow. They're there to exploit Africa and enrich themselves. So it's time for all Sahel nations to kick France out of Africa. I know a nation like Cameroon can't do it. It's too weak. It can't handle it. But it must in order to grow. The whole Sahel region, area, must kick France out. If Africa wants to grow, Africa will have to learn to understand, to choose the partners that they want to work with and do the work. You cannot just only choose the partners, but Africa must do the work in order for the continent to thrive. So just going with Russia will not solve our problems. It's learning the tactics and strategy need in order to eliminate all those who are trying to destroy the countries in the Sahel area. We need to work as a team, Sahel nations. We need to work as a team, Africa. We need to work as one people. But we can't do that if we're not able to listen to ourselves. We cannot do that if we're not willing to listen and learn from each other. If we don't do that, the cycle continues. It will never end. One European nation will come in and exploit and get the resources, and Africa will remain poor. So it is time for Africa to realize that the days of colonization are over. The days of neo-colonization are over. And the days for real independence is here. And we must step up our game if we want the continent of Africa to be truly independent. If we don't do that, we will be exploited by other races across the world. There's a multipolar world happening. And if Africa wants to have a strong economy, we need to change our political thinking. If Africa wants a strong economical growth, we need to change how things are done in the continent of Africa. We need to change how things are done in the Sahel countries. We need to change how things are done in Mali. We need to change how things are done in Burkina Faso. We need to change how things are done inside Africa in general. And we have to come up with the best or most practical way of how things need to be done in order for Africa to grow as a continent, and in order for the people of Africa to enjoy the surplus resources in the continent. If we don't, we will be recolonized, neo-colonized, and we will remain slaves. And even the leaders who think they have some kind of leverage over the people will also be slaves to Western nations, to Arab nations, to any other nation that is not of Africa. This is King Angel. Till next time.